Thank you, President. My question is directed to the Minister for Disability. Responsibility for supported independent living residences, SILs, used to fall to the states. In 2014, ahead of the NDIS rollout, then opposition leader Daniel Andrews promised that SILs would not be privatised. 2 years later, SILs were transferred to 5 private companies. Now, workers in SILs have retained the proper staffing ratios and protected training and supervision time embedded in their EBA, as the state government has provided subsidies to fund them. Hugely beneficial to SIL residents, but not covered in individual NDIS packages. The additional funding runs out in December, Minister, putting all of those benefits at risk on the eve of Christmas. As this funding runs out in less than 5 months, what is the government proposing to do to address this distressing problem?
Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Mr Ettershank for his question and his interest in these matters, as we've discussed over on a number of occasions. Obviously, in 2018, government-operated accommodation respite services were transferred to the non-government sector, and that was designed to deliver a successful transition to the NDIS in Victoria and provide for more choice and control over services and supports. And I would note that at the outset that the Victorian Government's contribution to the National Disability Insurance Scheme is around $3 billion. There were 5 non-government providers were chosen, with commercial contracts put in place that end, as Mr Ettershank said, on the 31st of December 2025. They were non-government providers. This was not seeking to privatise, but it was seeking, in the context of the National Disability Insurance Scheme and what that meant for supported independent living, to assist in the transition of government-supported workers to non-government providers. There were indeed transition arrangements put in place to ensure that staff were supported through this change. A phased approach was taken, and this included wages and conditions being protected until the end of the contract period, including transferring of incentive payments, secondment to their new provider rather than an immediate change in their employer, and an offer of employment and acceptance process at the end of 2020, and then direct employment with the new provider from the 1st of January 2021. And the final step in the transfer was to move the supported independent living funding from in-kind arrangements to direct NDIS plan funding for residents between February and June 2021. This was an important element of the transition to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And in doing so, I would also note that the government worked collaboratively with the union through this process, and that prior to the 2018 state election decision to transfer government-operated services and ongoing, government worked collaboratively with those relevant employee representatives. Consultation is guided by an MOU between the government and those representatives relating to matters regarding that transfer process. We know that this sector faces workforce challenges, and the NDIS review recommended the need to attract and retain and indeed train in order to be able to, for that retention, a workforce that is responsive to participant needs and participant requests for support in a timely way. We're continuing to work with the Commonwealth and other state and territories to ensure that the recommendations of the National Disability Insurance Scheme are implemented. And I would also note that the Victorian Government invests in this workforce. So we've got the $202.9 million Fighting for Students Disability package, which was delivered through the 23-24 budget, and that included $3.75 million being allocated over 4 years to deliver a disability workforce strategy.
Mr Ettershank, with supplementary question.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Minister, for your response. I think we almost got to an answer there. Nationally, workforce turnover across the NDIS, particularly within supported independent living facilities, is atrocious, with 1 in 4 disability workers leaving the sector annually, 3 times higher than the overall Australian workforce. It impacts the quality of care in SILs, with dire consequences for residents who are some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Our Victorian SILs have the lowest workforce churn, as the EBA provides good wages and conditions and the capacity for career progression. It mandates staffing ratios and supervision. Victorian subsidies pay for this, as NDIS funding does not cover these benefits, nor will it. When the subsidy lapses, there will be a mass exodus of disability support workers if this is not rectified. So I ask the Minister, will she here and now publicly commit to maintain this additional funding to protect disability workers' entitlements and continue the delivery of quality care in SILS?
Minister.
Thank you, President. And I would refer Mr Ettershank back to my substantive answer to his substantive question, which did indeed answer his question and spoke to the fact that these were transition payments in the establishment of the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the new measures around supported independent living, of which the state government is not a provider, but did provide financial support for that transition period. SILS services are funded by the NDIS, providers are regulated by the NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, and funding decisions such as SIL supports for NDIS participants are the responsibility of the NDIS. And I would also note that the state government contributes $3 billion to the NDIS for the NDIS to undertake its role. I, along with my other state and territory colleagues, are constantly working with the Commonwealth to ensure that the implementation of the NDIS review and indeed other recommendations that also came out of the Disability Royal Commission insofar as they are relevant are in the best interest of each of the states, given that we do, and Victoria being one of the largest, contributing $3 billion. But ultimately the matters that Mr Ettershank is referring to relate to SILS services funded by the National Disability Insurance Scheme.